Welcome to episode 11 of the G2 on 5G, the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel. So let's get started. My first topic is around Nokia and ORAN, and I spoke to this last week, but actually there was a formal announcement this week on their desire and their plans to deliver a complete solution by 2021. I'm not surprised to see this. Anshel, you and I have talked about this in the past. Nokia is, likely in, last place relative to its peers. And this is an attempt for them, to be very aggressive with the new technology. Now, certainly there are disruptive opportunities with it from a CapEx perspective because you're eliminating hardware, moving a lot of things into virtualization and software. But you're also going to introduce complexity, and that could potentially increase OpEx and the difficulty in managing all that. Any thoughts on your side about that?
Yeah, I think for me it's really a question of like, how is most of ORAN targeted towards deploying 5G, or is this also possibly targeted at 4G as well?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. From my perspective, you've already got the install base with LTE. I mean, there could be some densification there, but I would view this as sort of a 5G move, right? And what's also interesting is that most operators around the world are already in the midst of deploying the radio access network infrastructure to support 5G. So how do you introduce ORAN into the mix? I mean, do you ease it in? Do you do some pilots? And also. Nokia might get some trials under its belt this year, but will it really be ready in 2021 with a solid solution?
Yeah, and I think it'll be harder to do that. I have no illusions about the fact that, having COVID-19 may slow down the potential for that to come in market. But, it sounds like the statement was kind of a thing that was made recently, so it should be taking into account, whatever slowdowns may exist due to COVID.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see how things roll out. Hey, so your first topic this week, you want to touch on the release 16 of the 3GPP standard. I know we're going to do something a little more in depth on a future episode, but why don't you sort of take us through the highlights on this new release?
Sure. So release 16 came out. It's finalized. For some people who don't know, release 16 is essentially the second version of the 5G standard that has come out through 3GPP, because 3GPP, what they do is they create the spec, and then everybody follows that spec, and that spec informs global standards like the IMT 2020 and such. And release 16 is like the second phase of 5G. And the thing is, the big thing with this version of 5G is it adds a lot of the non-smartphone applications for 5G that allow for 5G to really apply itself in a way that's more than just smartphones and tablets and what mobile devices we already have today. So the 6 areas are, around unlicensed spectrum. They're around, advancing power savings and mobility, helping with high precision, like positioning, like for AR. There's also stuff that's related to V2X, even some mission critical stuff for manufacturing and facilities, as well as new ways to deploy networks. So we're going to cover it in more depth in the future because there's so much to talk about and it won't fit very, very neatly in this short period of time. But what we will do is we'll talk about it more. And this is really the big release for 5G. They're already working on release 17, which will add even more capabilities. But release 16 is actually very big because it broadens the scope of what 5G can do significantly. And it builds on, release 15, which introduced NSA and SA in the foundation.
Yeah, so I look forward to diving deeper into that with you on a future episode. Let's shift to my second topic this week. And I attended the Amazon Web Services Telecom Symposium. And, it's no secret that Amazon has been focused on wireless connectivity and services. And they've been testing the CBRS, spectrum for some time now, since last year. And some of my big takeaways were, number one, I'm impressed with the team that they have built. So they have brought industry veterans from the operator side and the infrastructure side from companies like Ericsson and Nokia onto the team. And so all the leaders that presented have, solid background and solid DNA in wireless. And, the other thing I'm very, impressed with is that they're focused on all the right ingredients. I mean, they're focused on 5G, obviously, but Edge, there've been several announcements recently that both myself and Patrick Moorhead, our principal, have written on Forbes about. Wavelength last year, which sort of supercharges edge computing and 5G, AI, automation. So they're hitting on all the right ingredients. And I'm not certain if you've been following them, but it sounds like they're putting a pretty impressive team together to go after this.
I haven't been following them as closely as you have, but I've been paying attention to stuff like wavelength, because I think the CSPs like AWS are ensuring that they have a position in the 5G network, because the reality is everything has a cloud component to it, and you can't do cloud unless you involve one of the big three CSPs,
Right.
excluding China, and because of that, like, AWS has to be competent. I mean, more than competent, they have to be proficient in 5G, and there's so many different components of it that they have to build all these different tools so that their partners and their customers can build services on top of that to utilize 5G network in a way that's different than what we have today with 4G.
Yeah. So I'll be spending more time with that team. I'm just getting, introduced to, executives there, and so I look forward to sharing more insights as I get to know that team further. So let's shift to your second topic this week, and you've talked about some of these GSA reports in the past, and there's a new one you want to talk about this week.
Yeah, GSA has a lot of really good reports when it comes to market numbers, and they've got a new report out that talks about 5G devices, and they basically said that there's 317 5G devices in the market, up from 112 in May. 135 of those are phones, with 95 of those 135 phones have already been revealed. 85 of those are CPE devices, 49 are modules, 22 are hotspots, 5 are laptops, and 21 are other devices like drones or vehicles. And then 76% of those 5G devices support sub-6, and 26 support mmWave, and 20% support both. And I think these numbers are, they're pretty good considering we're still really in the first year. A lot of people started to clock in April of last year when, all the markets started to roll out. But I really don't consider the first year to have been until maybe the end of last year. So I think by the end of this year, we should really be able to look back and say, what was the first year like? And it looks pretty promising. 20% of devices supporting mmWave and sub-6 is important. I think that number is only going to go up. It should. I mean, the cost of mmWave is still an issue for a lot of people, and I completely understand that. And especially when you consider how few markets are really have mmWave deployed in a meaningful manner, that it makes sense there isn't that much mmWave. But I think long term, mmWave is going to be super important to have, especially in places where you have high density networks, where, like in a big city, an urban environment. And I think that you're going to have people wanting to have access to that network, even if they don't live in the place. But when they come to the city, they want to be able to use it. So I think long term, this is good. It's positive, and I don't recall 4G having that many devices in the first year. So
I don't either. Yeah, actually, that number, the number, the 20% number supporting both sub-6 and mmWave, that surprised me. That seemed higher than I would have expected. To your point, really, the United States has really been, the only, significant market that's been investing.
And I think a big part of that is also a lot of the fixed wireless. So I think having fixed wireless using mmWave is a big component of that as well.
Good point.
And fixed wireless is still 5G. So it's gonna, I think long term, mmWave is gonna be a much bigger chunk of the market, just because bands are going to become more available. Hardware is going to get cheaper. It's a natural progression.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's shift to my third topic this week, and it's around Verizon and their announcement on a trial around their 5G standalone core. And I've got some of the details from the press release right here, but they're focused on virtualized and containerized 5G core. They believe that it's integral to enabling dynamic resource allocation through network slicing and mobile edge compute, which I agree, and that it's going to provide them a web scale architecture to provide them headroom and growth for the future. So I agree. I mean, this is getting us closer to the promise of real 5G, right? Because today we've got non-standalone, and eventually when we progress the core to standalone, we're going to see the true benefits with latency and performance. I know that you follow this quite a bit. What are your thoughts, Anshel?
I think it's super important, right? Because if you have a mmWave network and you want to show off your low latency and high speeds, you need to get yourself on SA as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're going to see a lot of networks switching over to SA, by the end of this year. It should have started earlier this year, Q1 or Q2, but because of COVID, I think a lot of things got delayed. But we're still going to see tons of SA networks this year, and it's just because there's the infrastructure vendors are enabling it, and there's going to be devices, and the network has to support it for the device to use it. So, it's a chicken and egg kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's shift to your third topic this week, and it's around Ericsson, and it's also focused on their standalone software architecture.
Yeah, so earlier this week, they released their standalone software, and that's basically kind of like the update to their software that enables standalone on hardware, specifically radio system equipment, up to devices manufactured in 2015, which, I think is part of the reason why a lot of companies, if they're really forward thinking, a lot of them will consider Ericsson because it gives them that forward upgradability. And I think, them having that already released last month, and this is kind of like a public release of it. They've already got it working in T-Mobile and Telstra and testing it right now. And, the thing is that they're claiming that SA 5G devices that are connected to an SA network are actually going to be able to connect to the network 6 times faster than an NSA mode. So that's a huge improvement. Being able to connect to the network faster means lower latency. And, that's the promise of 5G really, is being able to deliver these lower latencies so that your applications and your users are unaware that they're even on a wireless connection.
I agree. Good stuff, my friend. Well, another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope that our viewers and listeners this week found this week's topics interesting. And if anyone out there would like to reach out to us and provide some insight on the specific 5G topic they'd like us to cover in a future podcast, please reach out to both of us on social media. Will is at WillTownTech, and I'm at Anshel on Twitter. And we hope that you guys have a great weekend, and please tune in again next time.